comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens right now, with all due respect. No, it's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow. Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing. But and I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
The woke propaganda machine is running full speed, but one man is slamming the brakes and pointing out the nonsense in Bill Maher. The liberal comedian, never shy about revealing the flaws on his own side, just destroyed an MSNBC host who hopped aboard the Trump derangement bandwagon. So what did the MSNBC show say that lit the fuse? And how did Maher's brutal clapback leave them falling? I've got all the information right here. Stick around, guys. This one's going to be fire. But before then, if you've not subscribed yet, hit the subscribe button for more videos like this.
And Martin?
Yep.
I was not aware of who he was before. I did not think it got off to a great start, because I think they need to completely reroute themselves, and I don't think they did it. What do you think?
Let me pause for a moment and pay close attention to the question and how Chris Hayes answers. The question was straightforward. Ma wanted to know how the Democrats plan to root themselves after their election losses to Donald Trump. Now listen to Hayes' answer.
I think there's sort of two different imperatives that are in a little bit of tension with each other. So one, I think there's an imperative right now for the party to stand up against the most destructive things that Musk and Trump are doing. And I think they're doing some genuinely destructive things. I mean, there's people walking around the world right now with like devices inside their bodies from clinical trials sponsored by USAID that they can't get out. The guards that were guarding ISIS prisoners in Syria were paid on USAID salaries that got cut off. There's a 25-year-old mucking around the code base of the Treasury system. So there's things they have to do to try to oppose. But it's also the case that like all of the reflection that happened after losing that election and trying to figure about how do you win back people you lost was real and true. And I guess my feeling is you gotta fight, you gotta try different things, and you have to be authentic. You can't like reverse engineer any of this off a blueprint. And I really think this is true about politics. Steve Jobs once said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. Like, it's our job. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Barack Obama off of George W. Bush. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Donald Trump off of Barack Obama. What happens in the end of an election is everyone sifts through the data and they come up with their perfect, their plan based on, well, this worked and with this group and we got to tack here and there. And what politics about is a certain point is like innovation and communication. You got to come up with new stories.
So according to Hayes, it isn't the customer's right to determine what they want, nor is it the voters' right to choose who they want. The choice has to be made for them. In the world of the Democrats, they reserve the sole right to choose. For the voters, what they want. You see how ridiculous that sounds. Now wait for Bill Maher's takedown.
Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing. But and I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
Bill Maher shut Chris Hayes down with just one brutal line. People didn't like the message, and that was it. Game over, while Hayes rambled in circles about reverse engineering, political strategies, and fighting on two fronts to win elections. Maher cut straight to the heart of the problem. The answer wasn't buried under layers of political jargon or complex ideas. It was simple. Do what people want, Hayes's overcomplicated answer only highlighted the disconnect between the Democratic Party and the average voter. Instead of answering why their messaging failed, Hayes danced around the obvious, but Maher wasn't having it. He made it clear that the problem wasn't about strategy or image, it was about substance. Voters heard the Democrats' message loud and clear. They just didn't like it. That's the hard fact the left keeps avoiding. It's not about refining the pitch, it's about changing the product. If your message doesn't resonate, no amount of political spin will save you. And until the Democrats figure that out, they'll keep losing ground. If you think you've heard the worst from MSNBC's Chris Hayes, wait for the next statement.
I think that I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little like, I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense patriotic pluralism.
Yeah.
That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have healthcare for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the fuck out of their business. Let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family.
You've got to love how the left's woke mob loves to muddy the seas. Here, Chris Hayes argues that if parents have gender-affirming care lined up for their children, they should be allowed to proceed with the transition, and that it's nobody else's business. But that's not the real argument, nor is it what the left has been pushing. And Bill Maher wastes no time setting the record straight.
The argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that is the case.
Exactly. What the left was really pushing for wasn't just about parental choice or supporting kids. It was about giving schools the power to decide whether a child could disclose their transition process to their own parents. Essentially, kids could hide life-altering decisions from the very people responsible for their well-being. While schools took on the role of guardians, think about that. Parents who are legally and morally responsible for their children could be completely shut out of critical decisions about their child's health and identity. Is it just me? Or does it seem like the left is already running from its own message just months after the election? And honestly, who could blame them? If my message was that bizarre, disconnected, and potentially dystopian, I'd be sprinting away from it too. This isn't just about politics, it's about common sense, parental rights, and protecting the family unit. The idea that bureaucrats and school officials know better than a child's own parents is not only absurd, but dangerous. It's an overreach that most Americans simply can't and won't accept. And deep down, the left knows it. That's why they're backpedaling, softening their stance and pretending it was never their position to begin with. Because when the spotlight hits these radical policies, even they realize just how indefensible and extreme they really are. And that is why voters left the Democrats' camp in droves. Not that they didn't have a message, but their message was strange and out of touch with reality. Sadly, traditional media is in on all the garbage from the left. That is why new media was at the forefront of Trump's re-election. When Bill Maher put this reality to a lefty, listen to what she had to say.
What do you think of the Trump White House admitting more influencers and podcasters into the press corps? Yeah, the press room is different. I mean, it reflects America.
I think it's great.
Yeah, you do.
But it's mostly right-wing influencers and podcasters, obviously, but I think it's a good step. I mean, this is how people are getting their news.
It is. I mean, how can you deny it?
I was actually over there the other day, and it's packed in there. And
Yeah.
I think even all the reporters, whether you're Legacy or the podcasting people, they're all happy. And then they have like the one rotating chair, which I guess is pretty cool. So there's always like somebody new that comes in.
So this
Yeah.
is you're at the White House, you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that was their first
Well,
new
it
media.
is. It is new media because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's what Bezos bought the Washington Post for. He bought it for like $1, didn't he?
Byron Donald's given an interesting and sharp observation. Legacy media isn't just a bystander in the Democrats' present downfall, they're complicit. From twisting storylines to burying groundbreaking stories, the legacy media practically shot themselves in the foot. And in doing so, they opened the door wide open for new independent media to take center stage. But did you catch how the guest tried to downplay Trump's original idea of inviting podcasters and independent journalists to the White House? She dismissed it by claiming Axios didn't really count as new media. Why? Because Axios has been around for 5 years and was bought for $500 million. That was her case. As if the size of a media company or its price tag somehow strips it of its independent voice. But here's the real kicker: even in opposition, the woke left seems completely blind to reality. Even when it's staring them dead in the face, they can't seem to grasp that the media landscape has fundamentally changed. It's no longer about big corporate names controlling the story. It's about authenticity, connection, and the raw power of independent voices that resonate with real Americans. And maybe that's exactly why the legacy media feels so threatened. Because while they're clinging to outdated definitions and price tags, new media is out there connecting with the people telling the stories that actually matter and shaping the conversations that legacy outlets are desperately trying to ignore.
Here's where the rubber meets the road, because this is important. He wanted to, this week, he's suing the 12-member commission, the California Coastal Commission. He launches his rockets from Vandenberg Space Force Base. He used to call it Air Force Base, but I guess now we're into Space Force time. He wanted the proposal to expand the number of launches. Okay, again, one of the most impressive companies, an American company. He wants a little more, give it to him. No. The commission, some bureaucrat, said nope, and this is the reason why. Commissioner Carol Hart saying, we're dealing with a company the head of which has aggressively injected himself into the presidential race and made it clear what his point of view is. Yes, because he lives in America, and he can do that.
There's no overstating just how vindictive and bureaucratic the left became when the Democrats were in power. It wasn't just about pushing policies, it was about weaponizing every layer of bureaucracy to enforce their plan and silence dissent. From government agencies being used to suppress opposing opinions to the relentless red tape that stifled innovation and freedom, the left's approach wasn't just political, it was personal. They didn't just disagree with their opposition, they sought to dismantle them. Whether it was targeting conservative voices, enforcing rigid mandates, or creating endless hoops for anyone daring. To question the status quo, the left's tactics were marked by control and retribution. It wasn't governance, it was control masked as progressive policy. And now, as their grip loosens, it's almost ironic to watch them cry foul about openness and fairness. After all, it's easy to preach about equality when you're the one setting the rules and silencing the opposition. But when that power changes suddenly, the champions of bureaucracy have a lot less to say.
That they're far too willing to stifle freedoms, including speech, for the sake of safety or misinformation, sometimes which is coming from everybody. It's, no one has a monopoly on it. Or just power. It's just power.
Monopoly on it. Come on. That's some moral relativism right there.
I said nobody has a monopoly.
You said nobody has a monopoly on it, but that's like saying nobody has a monopoly on being a billionaire. He's got that monopoly up here. I mean, he's got more money than us. A lot more money than us. So,
I don't get the.
You don't get it?
I don't know what point you're making.
You're saying it's both sides.
Poor Bill Maher. Sometimes I can't help but feel a bit of pity for the guy. Sure, he's a master of quips, sharp with sarcastic comments, and always ready with a cutting clapback, but having to sit across from Joe Scarborough week after week, that's got to be exhausting. What exactly was Scarborough's point this time? Ma made a fair and balanced observation stating that both the left and the right are guilty of spreading misinformation, a sentiment even Mark Cuban agreed with. But instead of acknowledging this simple truth, Scarborough launched into a bizarre, convoluted rant in his desperate attempt to pin disinformation solely on Trump and Musk. He ended up making an argument so confusing that neither Ma nor Cuban could figure out what he was even trying to say. It's almost like Scarborough was grasping at straws, unwilling to accept that misinformation isn't exclusive to one side of the aisle. But that's the problem. When you're so deep in the partisan trenches, you lose sight of reality, and even the simplest truths become too uncomfortable to face, which is why Ma left Scarborough with this scathing comment.
Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens right now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow.
What an absolutely scorching takedown from Bill Maher. He didn't just criticize, he dismantled the story with precision. If the left wants even a fighting chance at winning future elections in this country, they need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and rethink their entire approach. It's not just about words or playing it safe with outdated policies. Americans are demanding real answers to real problems, solutions that reflect today's economic realities, cultural shifts, and national objectives. The left can't keep coasting on past victories or depending on the same tired playbook. Voters are smarter, more aware, and far less tolerant of political games. Maher's lesson is simple but powerful. Adapt or lose revive. Your politics craft policies that actually connect with everyday Americans and stop dismissing legitimate concerns as fringe or irrelevant, because if they don't, they'll continue losing ground to candidates who aren't afraid to speak directly to the people and address what truly matters. And on that note, we draw the doors on today's video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.